you think of Allen Klein as this
loudmouth,
cigar smoking
Yeah.
guy. He just stays quiet, and Eastman looks like crazy.
Hello again and welcome to I've Got a Beatles podcast with Dave and Chris. And today we're going to go and give another episode in our series Beatle Friends. But one might easily say, and we're going to debate whether this is true or not, but we could call it Beatle Villain, maybe.
Yeah, Beatle
And
enemy,
Beatle enemy.
Beatle friend question mark.
Right, exactly. And of course, that means we're going to be talking about Allen Klein. And
Right.
Chris and I both read, I read it, and then you did the audiobook of the Fred Goodman biography of Allen Klein called Allen Klein, the Man Who Bailed Out the Beatles, Made the Stones, and Transformed Rock and Roll from 2015. I don't know what you thought, but I thought it was pretty enlightening, actually, and very helpful.
Yeah, and a fair assessment of Allen Klein. They don't make any bones about the negatives, but they also do accentuate there were some positives, and even in his role with the Beatles initially, he was cleaning up a huge mess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
did clean up the huge mess. Now, whether or not he took a lot of the money and put it in his own pocket or not, both with the Beatles and the Stones and Sam Cooke and Bobby Darin, the other
Oh,
people
yeah.
he was involved with, open for your own interpretation. I did want to say I listened to it on audiobook through Audible, and there is a feature with if you have Amazon Music Unlimited, Audible is free. You can do one book at a time on Audible. So
Hmm.
I was able to listen to this through Audible for free. So just pointing that out for any of you who want to listen to any of the Beatles books, that's a good little feature. This was 11 hours about
Yeah,
Allen Klein, maybe
yeah.
several hours too many on Allen Klein,
Yeah,
but
it's a lot. Well, such a fascinating figure. So, like others in our series, we've only really talked about musicians. So, we've talked about Klaus Vormann, we talked about Jim Keltner, people like that. But this is somebody who didn't come into the Beatles' orbit until later in their career, but
mhm.
very significantly had an impact on them and was a well-known commodity by that point. And I think you learn a lot of stuff about Alan Klein, about the music industry and the music business,
Yeah.
and frankly, how bad musicians are at business. I don't know if that was one of your big takeaways, but they're
Yeah.
just terrible at knowing what's going on. And that's we're going to get to when we talk about Alan Klein and the Beatles. That's certainly played into their relationship. So why do you think is that just how it is? You have creative
Yeah.
people and then you get taken advantage of, and not necessarily taken advantage of, but just you don't know what you're doing when it comes to the business side.
And it is business, and depending on how you feel on business, about business in general, about corporations, about
Yeah,
companies, their biggest goal is to make money,
of
and
course.
they want to hold on to as much money as possible and not give the employees or the artists in this case, give them as little as possible. They're the ones making you money. You give them as little as possible. You hold on to it for yourself. I think Alan Klein was definitely cut from that cloth. Maybe Alan Klein started with the idea in mind of, hey, let's get artists a little bit more money. In the early days of music, uh, all these artists are starting to blow up, and they're signing these contracts. They don't know what they are. They don't know how much they're getting paid. They barely know what the music business is. The music business probably doesn't know what it is quite yet.
No,
That was one of the big takeaways from this book is the bedlam and the fact that there weren't a lot of people out there to help out artists. So someone comes along and says, I'm here. I'm trying to get money for Sam Cooke. I worked with Sam Cooke. I got him a little more money. Oh, great. Let's sign him up. We don't know what we're doing.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, you think of
So,
that scene in the movie Ray. Of course, Ray Charles was blind, so and he somebody the business person comes in and makes him sign a contract, and of course he doesn't even know what he's signing, and it's a
mhm.
terrible contract,
Yeah.
and that happened all the time, I think. So
Yeah.
you're right. I think actually, I would say Alan Klein always felt that he had the interests of the artist, the best interests at heart, even if
Yeah.
he did some potentially nefarious and devious ways of getting the money. I think he
Yeah.
did try, and he may be a villain, but I don't. We'll get to the final assessment, but I do think he did some good things and
Yeah.
certainly helped many of these artists in some ways. So maybe we should go back. He was born in 1931 in Newark, New Jersey, and then died in 2009 on my birthday, the 4th of July. So he lived a pretty long life, 77, died of Alzheimer's, sadly, and kind of had a big downhill at the end. But his childhood was not good. He was born in Newark and in an orphanage. Uh, Mother died of cancer, I think, very early. Her father died.
Hmm.
So very bad, kind of hard scrabble upbringing. And I think that was something that carried through his whole life. Dogged determination and kind of like I don't need people. I'm going to do what I need to do.
Who else in the Beatles does that sound like?
Exactly.
And so the rough upbringing, the orphan sort of attitude that John had really makes a lot more sense to me why him and Alan Klein connected initially, at least, so strongly because they were both sort of like outcasts in a way
Right.
and rough from the streets type
Yeah.
guys who had some, obviously some tragedy with both of their mothers.
Right, exactly. And I think Klein being from New York and also being Jewish, I do think there was some anti-Semitism that is carried throughout his career. You hear a lot of in the book, a lot of the comments that some people said about him were pretty nasty, and
Hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
doesn't help his attitude of kind of bulldozing anything and everything to get his way. And I think that's something you can say about him is well, I don't know. Did you think the book sometimes painted him as just a absolute monster, bull in a china shop, but then also he had this other side,
Yeah.
or
Well,
yeah, I mean, like everybody, I guess.
yeah, I mean, yes, but when you've got quotes like, here's a quote from his wife.
Yeah,
When Alan wants something, he sucks the blood out of you.
yeah,
So
yeah. That's
that
pretty
really
damning.
stuck out to me of like the way he handled the initial meetings with Eastman,
Oh yeah,
which we'll get to a
we'll get
little
to
bit,
all that.
but
Yeah.
just seemed like, wow, he could have, many times he could have handled things a lot nicer, a lot better than
Oh yeah.
he reminds me a lot of Roy Cohn and
Yeah.
Roy Cohn's favorite disciple, not to get very deep into political waters here, but Donald Trump,
Right.
in that
Right.
they're always going to take the attack,
Ruthless.
ruthless position
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
every interaction. They cannot back down.
Right.
And in
Yeah.
Alan Klein's case, especially in the case of the lawsuit with against McCartney, where McCartney had sued everybody in the Beatles because he had to. If Alan Klein had not taken it so personally, he probably would have won the case. But
Exactly.
instead his reactions to it, that's just his personality is like, I've got to attack, I've got to keep fighting all the time and be really a bully
Yeah,
sometimes.
bully.
Really, really.
It's somebody with a chip on his shoulder, and I think that as you've already alluded to, John probably felt that way too, that he had a chip on his shoulder and had something to prove, and he didn't like the elites and didn't like again, it's that same kind of language that we still hear nowadays, but It was very much part of Klein's persona.
Hmm.
So he had luck though. He happened to meet the right people. So he
Yeah.
would meet Don Kirshner, who would
Hmm.
then who managed a bunch of people, and then eventually I think he found the Monkees, kind of founded that later
Yeah.
on. Mickey Most, the producer of Herman's Hermits, and he just seemed to luck
Yeah.
out into these connections. And then
There was a story of him meeting Bobby Darin like on the street or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
and convincing him to, hey, have me look for royalties. He had gotten hired by some company to look for royalties. That was what he wanted to do. Look
Yes.
for royalties for artists. So
He did these things, these audits. He
yeah,
would,
these audits. I'm gonna
yeah,
do audits. I'm gonna like come up with these. But of course, the record companies don't want him around. They're like,
no.
quit snooping. We want to do what we want to do. So it does seem like he started from a very good place of trying to get artists their rightful share. Well,
Right.
he convinced Bobby Darin to do this and apparently found almost nothing for after promising the world
That
to
was the
Bobby
other
Darin.
thing. Like you said, he promised, he overpromised, went up to the Rolling Stones, you want to make $1 million or Sam Cooke, or just like throwing out just BS
Yeah.
numbers. And so yeah, then the Bobby Darin, they didn't find anything, but they promised him a bunch of money. And
Hmm.
so, how does that work out going forward? That's kind of his model. But eventually, he forms his company, which I'll show you some records shortly that have it
Yeah.
on it. But Abco,
Yeah.
so Allen and Betty Klein and Company,
Yeah.
and so that's he has this great idea. And in a way, I think it did transform, like the author says, transformed rock and roll. So he's not a manager like Brian Epstein.
Yeah.
He's kind of a level removed. He's got this, I don't want to say shell company, but it's kind of a company that pays the artist. So it's not Allen Klein paying, it's this company that then pays the record company to make things and do all this stuff and this arrangement. But it's ingenious because then it's all done through cash advances and royalty. It's
Hmm.
paid over decades. So I'm going to give you, Sam Cooke, millions of dollars over 20
Hmm.
years.
Yeah.
Well, how's that work out when it's your company and you're getting interest every year, and then you pay that $1 million then
Yeah.
becomes $5 million and you
And
pocket.
then if Sam Cooke, say, dies,
Right, right.
does his family get the money?
Hmm.
Apparently, no, according to a documentary in 2019 called Lady Who Shot Me, The Life and Death of Sam Cooke. Klein was predatory
Hmm. Hmm.
towards Cooke, is what that documentary claimed. Now, the book paints it sort of a little more evenly, like, well, Cooke didn't want to perform in certain places and did get a wider audience on his work. So it's a little,
Yeah.
there's also rumors that Klein had Cook killed and stuff like that, and
Yeah, the
that seems to
conspiracy.
be conspiracy fodder. But to be fair, with that one, that seems like the nicest relationship he
Yeah,
had with.
actually true. Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah,
they got along, and there were other people before Sam Cooke, but he was kind of the first really
yeah.
big name that Klein took over. Did Klein have much musical input? Did he have much to say, or did he really stay out of things, do you think?
I mean, with the Beatles, because of the time he came in, it seems like he was the one who kind of revived the what ended up being Let It Be project.
Right, right.
And he definitely was the one who hired Phil Spector to come in.
Yeah.
So in those ways, it seemed like he had something to do with the music. Um, but I think generally no.
No, I agree. And I think it's similar to Brian Epstein. So I think they didn't. Now, difference was that Epstein really was the manager of the Beatles, and I think we all know he made some pretty bad business deals, and the
Hmm.
Beatles admitted that and knew that. So Klein was a very different kind of model. But I think it's instructive to look at maybe after Sam Cooke died, then we get into the whole Rolling Stones saga, which is
Yeah.
a big part of the book, and it went on for decades,
Yeah.
trying to settle and all sorts of nuts things. But we can start it with Andrew Loog Oldham,
Oh yeah.
kind of where it all began. So,
Yeah.
let's talk about the Stones a little bit. What are your thoughts on Klein and the Stones?
Yeah. Well, when you've got a kind of bad manager
Yeah, yeah,
who's overmatched, then
yeah.
that opens up opportunity for Klein to come in. So Oldham, by all accounts, was just you know,
Drug addict and
yeah, a total mess,
yeah,
and as big of a mess as you know, Brian Jones at the
yeah,
time. A huge break for Klein too, because before that he was involved a little bit with Bobby Vinton. Bobby Vinton's
yeah.
not a huge name,
No,
you know, not
not
the
anymore.
one, not one of the top names in music, but the Rolling Stones, to get the Rolling Stones in your, like, I am working with the Rolling Stones,
Yeah.
opens up a lot of doors, and obviously opened up the doors for the Beatles. The Beatles is the big prize, and he wanted from day one of seeing the
Yes.
Beatles, loved the
Yes.
Beatles, wanted in with the Beatles, was obsessed with getting in with the Beatles. Didn't seem like any contact he had with Brian Epstein went anywhere.
No, no, not at
Epstein was
all.
probably like, I don't like this guy, forget it. With the Stones, they've got a bad manager. Yeah, it's a good way to come in, and he sets up this deal, sets up Abco, and he's got some rights to the early Stones music
Yeah.
to this day.
To this day, correct. Yeah, it's like a 50% deal. So Lug Oldham had 50%, if I remember correctly, and then the writing members of the Stone, the rest of it was split through, and then it became Mick and Keith because they wrote most of the songs.
Mm,
So Oldham sells Allen Klein his share, so then Abco takes over half of it,
yeah.
and so it becomes a thing. Now the book has a lot of great anecdotes and stories. So there were two Stones who were immediately suspicious of Klein, and Bill Wyman being one who was always
Mm,
suspicious of him, and then Mick Jagger eventually
yeah.
kind of figured out that something was off here. And
I think at some point, when they started to kind of split, Mick Jagger like attacked him and
yeah,
physically attacked him
yeah,
in a meeting.
right, right. So it became literally came to blows in
Yeah.
a meeting. But for a while, Klein did get the Stones a lot more exposure and a lot more
Yeah.
money and
Yeah.
performances and tours. And I have a record here. This is the
Oh,
Rolling
wow.
Stones Greatest Hits Volume 2, I
Well, it's
believe.
Mick Taylor there, right? The center.
I know, look at that. And you have it's on, if look at this label.
Abco. Abco. Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So it's an Abco
For our
label.
listeners, it's an Abco label with a
Yeah, yeah,
blue
yeah, yeah.
label there.
So like you said, for up until well, from the early Stones up until Exile on Main Street, basically is all Abco songs
Yeah.
owned
Yeah.
that material. And
In
he
fact, when they recorded Exile Main Street, there was some, they wanted to put that completely not Abco,
yeah,
but he was like, hey, I have
wait a
tapes
minute.
that, you know, some of the early takes of some of these tracks were done years ago. So there, those are Abco.
Yep,
And
yep.
so, you know, he's savvy
Savvy, great word.
and made sure that if it was partially his property, he would hold on to it.
Yeah.
All the way to the Verve,
Oh yeah,
which we'll
Bittersweet
get to at the
Symphony.
very end. But yeah, the Verve Bittersweet Symphony uses a little sample. It doesn't sound anything like
No.
the last time, I believe, is where the
Yeah,
sample
yeah,
came
yeah.
from. But he's still alive at that time. He's like, no, no, no,
No, that's mine.
that's mine. So sued them for royalties, and they had to actually turn all of their royalties for that their biggest hit to Apco. Now I think his son a few years ago returned all of the credits and the royalties to Richard Ashcroft. So
Right.
that was good. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
know.
he just like a dog with a bone. He wasn't gonna be like nice guy
No.
with these type of things.
No,
So
and in the reading and reading about Klein, it's not like the record companies are great either. I mean, they're all terrible. They're
yeah,
because, like you said, there's only a when you're a corporation, your purpose is to make money,
yeah,
and the artist, if you exploit the artist, well, that's business, and it kind of works that way. So Klein, he's not the only bad actor sometimes, but
yeah,
he did help the Stones, and but there's a lot of detail
yeah.
about his relationship. But eventually it went sour, and so to get into the Beatles aspect, they have the rock and roll circus.
That's right.
Yes, so one of our favorite moments in that movie is where John and Mick are eating
You blues,
Chinese
John.
food. You're
You blues, John.
Yeah. And so what happens? So John's there, Yoko's there,
Yeah.
and and
I
Alan
think
Klein
he
wants to meet
That's
Lennon.
right. That's right. That was the only reason he really went, I think,
Yeah.
was to meet
Yeah.
Lennon. He's like, I gotta meet Lennon. And he did his homework, and I think they met very briefly
Yes, it
at the
was
Rock and
quick.
Roll Circus, and he was just very friendly and very nice and
Right.
effusive. Only a few years ago, Dave, do we get a full picture of from the Get Back documentary. You
Yes.
remember our
Yeah.
episodes on the Get Back documentary, and we see John talking about he's going to go meet Allen Klein,
Oh yeah.
and then afterwards we saw that aftermath where John was like, "Oh yeah, he's great." So I guess during this meeting, though, they describe it a little bit in the book. One thing he did that was smart was like he found out what they were eating, but
Yes.
because they were always on weird diets and
The
stuff.
macrobiotic veggie diet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he got that, and then he talked about being an orphan. He didn't pitch being the manager. He just talked about the music
Hmm.
and talked to John about music, and they stayed up, I guess, until 3 a.m.
Yeah. And
Uh,
so this was at their flat in New York. Maybe it was London, I guess. Uh,
Yeah,
but but Yoko was also very like he was very nice to Yoko and very interested in her, and I think that impressed John quite a bit. So it was a really positive meeting. But like you said, he's always prepared. That's something. That goes with someone who's really dogged and ambitious. You do your homework, but then also you don't bring it up on your first meeting after you've cooked dinner and everything, and say, "Hey, can we sign a contract right now?"
yeah.
And
Then it's
so,
like, oh, he doesn't
oh, you
really. I see what this was
soured
all
it.
about.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that came later. But yeah, really positive initial thing. And I remember everybody saying when the Get Back clip came out, everyone said, "No, no, this is gonna be bad. We know where
Yeah,
this goes." And yeah, we know it did end not well, but at the
yeah.
time, they were impressed because John and Klein really related to one another.
And what I got from the book, and it really has changed my mind on everything about the reason they hired Alan Klein. Um, Apple,
Mm,
what a disaster. What a
total,
mess.
total mess.
So if you're in disaster mode, if you're melting down, you're just trying to find somebody to help you, you know?
Yeah.
And in one corner is a guy who's going to be the relative of a one member.
Right. Yeah.
And in the other camp is a guy who's worked with the Rolling Stones
And still managing them or
and still
still.
managing them, whether or
Yeah.
not some of them had questions by that point. We got this big mess. We need somebody to clean it up. Which of
Yeah.
these guys are we going to go with? Oh, let's go with the Rolling Stones guy, and he'll clean up the Apple cart,
Yes, as
so
it
to
were.
speak. Yeah,
So there's a lot of stuff you just got to unpack some of this. That's some good stuff. There's a story, again, a rumor, a myth that goes around that Mick Jagger warned Lennon, don't get involved with Klein. He's terrible, all this and that. Really, what it seems like Jagger said was, well, he's okay if you like that kind of person
yeah,
who is just that sort of bulldog or bully. He's
yeah.
okay. But I don't think Jagger had he didn't warn him or anything particularly.
Yeah, and the timeline on that's a little rough
Yeah,
anyway, because it's like they did have a falling out, but it was like a year or so later with the
right,
Stones. By
right.
the time probably Let It Be's coming out, the Stones are deciding, okay, let's get rid of Klein.
So you've got
Um,
that, and then really, we've have we ever had a "Why did the Beatles break up" episode? I don't think we've ever officially had that big discussion. We've talked about it, but for me, I always think that Brian Epstein's death was a huge part of that, and Lennon
yeah,
knew that. He said that because as soon as Epstein died, that's when Klein's like, "Okay, here's my chance.
yeah.
I'm gonna do it now. I can get in."
I was always, I had that. I think I even wrote a paper.
Yes, you did. You talked about.
I think in high school or in college, arguing that Allen Klein was the reason for the Beatles breakup, not Yoko or not any of these
Right.
other reasons. But now I really think it's that they didn't get a replacement for Brian Epstein.
Hmm.
And then Paul tried to kind of lead the projects from then on. And Paul and John coming up with the lame-brained idea to do Apple without any kind of consultation or
No.
with this altruistic, oh, it's gonna be a business where you don't have to beg and you just come in and
Yeah,
do
come
whatever.
in and right.
It's like, oh, that's not really gonna work, guys.
No, no.
It's gonna be a mess. I don't know if you remember, but right out of college, I moved into a house with a bunch of people, and the idea was going to be a real artist place where
Oh,
you could play music and do art and take pictures.
it was like
It,
Apple.
it ended up being like Apple, like a cesspool of filth and chaos and unpaid bills.
Uh-huh.
So, so,
Just like Apple.
yeah, so that's the point they're in when Klein comes in. And so I really think it wasn't so much him, but he didn't help. Had he been like, you know what? Me and Eastman can do this together
Yeah.
and gotten Paul on Paul's side.
Well, first, a little fact. So Derek Taylor, along with Apple, Derek Taylor is really the one who introduced or who recommended that Klein work with Lennon and meet them. And so the meetings were fine at first, but Klein gets a lot of the crap for it. But I'm going to blame Paul McCartney for some of this too. I mean, what is
Mhm.
he thinking? Trying to like that the other Beatles wouldn't mind having his soon to be father-in-law and brother-in-law running. I mean, what is that?
Yeah,
I mean, and
I
especially when he
guess.
was sneaky. You noticed, remember that Paul had been buying up shares when they were selling Northern
Yes,
songs. So Paul was
yes.
doing some pretty sneaky things under on the side.
Yeah, that's true. That is
So
true. And that's never spoken about.
no, no,
But I think you're right. And I guess Eastman had worked out a deal. So he meets with the old Beatles, and Eastman's got this deal in place to buy Mims. So that
right.
the problem is Mims,
Brian Epstein's
Brian,
former
yeah.
company.
And
Yeah,
so he died. So who owns that? What are
yeah,
some of our interests are part of that? What's going to happen to it?
right.
So they've got to get it.
Yeah, from
And
Clive Epstein.
Klein just comes in and bulldozes it and is like, "Nope, you're not doing that. Screw you."
Yeah,
And then Eastman, he's young guy too. He's
yeah.
like in his 20s here.
Linda's brother. Yeah.
Is just absolutely gobsmacked and really like flies off the like I've worked this deal out and like has this big fight.
Yeah.
Klein wisely has been now think about this. Eastman's been in probably this is the most important meeting he's ever been in.
Yep.
Klein's been in hundreds of these meetings, arguing, bullying people, and pushing
Yeah.
people around, fighting off Mick Jagger, though. I think that was later. But so he knows wisely just to stay quiet. So
Yeah.
you think of Alan Klein says,
Loudmouth
loud
and
mouth,
yeah.
cigar smoking
Yeah.
guy. He just stays quiet, and Eastman looks like crazy. So
Hmm.
the other Beatles are like, you know, man, really don't want Eastman at this
Yeah.
point,
Maybe Klein's better than
Yeah.
Eastman. Right.
And then I think that Eastman, and he went and had a good career of his own of
Oh yeah.
being, probably a better career overall than Allen Klein.
Yeah.
But John and Eastman were like
Oh yeah. They didn't.
not personality matches.
Mm-mm.
I think Eastman took him to his a place one time and showed off all of his fine art and all of his.
Yes, real elitist
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly. So
Yeah.
John's like, yeah, I don't like this.
I'd rather take the guy who's gonna fight for me
Yeah,
and from the streets.
you're right though. Had step one been Paul not bought up anything and not tried to hire Eastman
Yeah.
and had an alternate plan that didn't include a near relative, maybe this Alan Klein stuff never happens.
Yeah.
They probably still go do their own projects, but maybe they all kind of like easily come back together at some
Hmm.
point instead of it getting so tense. And there it was already tense before they
It
even
was
met
getting
Alan
there.
Klein too.
Yeah.
We saw the Get Back documentary. Remember John meets Alan Klein in the Get Back documentary, but it's after George has quit for a week.
That's right.
Ringo quit several months before that. So it's like
Yeah. The
it's
writing was
already
on the wall.
people are already wanting to get out of there and sick of this
Yeah.
crap and all that kind of thing. So anyway,
Let's talk about a few main points with Klein and the Beatles or things that we found interesting from their relationship. So he renegotiated their record contract with EMI
hmm
and really did get a much better deal. And he
yeah,
advocated for George, for example. He really pushed that would later come back to bite him in the ass a little bit, but and then bite George in the ass. But he pushed for something to be
yeah,
on a single from Abbey Road. The like you said, the Get Back project would have
yeah.
just completely probably died.
It may
Uh,
have never come out, kind of like Rock and Roll Circus never came out, right? Oh, there it is. There it
an
is.
Abco
He's
company.
holding up the an Abco managed company label on the back of his Let It Be really
Yeah.
banged up
I really banged up Let It Be
old Let
original.
It Be original. You need a
I
bag
need
for
a
that thing. The other thing that doesn't get talked about, I don't even think the book covers this, is he's coming in to clean up Apple. Now they do talk about how he fired a bunch of people at Apple, does a clean sweep.
including,
Uh,
did you laugh like I did at the Magic Alex descriptions?
yeah, well, yes.
I mean, is there
Yeah.
anybody funnier in the Beatles story? But
I mean, it's probably a smart and much needed clean
yeah, clean
sweep.
house.
They call it in the book, they call it an unsupervised playground. Old friends were just kind of draining money and it was like running an open bar for the world.
Unbelievable.
Um,
Yeah.
but Tony Bramwell said he wanted to get rid of everybody so he could cook the books and milk the company dry.
As if they weren't doing a good
Yeah,
job of that earlier.
yeah. Think about it. The Beatles are hiring him not just to be there to clean up their stuff, but to clean up all of Apple.
Right.
So a couple of things, fallouts of this. One is Mary Hopkin, who at the time was sort of up and coming, doing pretty good. She said, here's a quote from Mary Hopkin: "A creep, a total creep. I don't like people who patronize me." So
Mm.
that's and then Klein comes in. James Taylor is there, if you
Yeah.
remember. We did
Yeah.
a Apple Scruff on
Yep.
James Taylor, and as soon as Klein came in, he's like, "I'm out of here." Signs with somebody else, and then becomes takes off. His career takes off.
Right.
So it
Right.
really looks like, wow, he blew that one.
There's pro ups and downs certainly with him.
Yeah,
But Beatles, well, okay, so he was aware of that conversation that John had at the end of '69 about breaking up, like he wanted to split the group and have a divorce and all of that, and
yeah,
kind of helped persuade John and the rest of them to keep it quiet and not say anything. And so then the Let It Be project happens, and
yeah.
he hires Phil Spector, which there's also some great stories in the book about Phil Spector, some that we already knew, but some of the other just interactions
Yeah.
with the gun and just like Phil Spector apparently was so freaked out to meet the Beatles. He was so scared. He could hardly, he was, what did they say? He was flying in first class and he was lying on in the aisle floor. He was so nervous.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so that this is going along, and then eventually things start to get bad, and it has to deal
Yeah.
with Paul and the other three. So
Yeah.
what's going on with that situation?
Well, I wanted to read a quote from the book from Peter Asher, which I think is like the crux of all of this. The fact that John was completely convinced that Alan was the right person for the job, and Paul was convinced with equal tenacity and determination that he wasn't, meant that Alan Klein's arrival drove a giant wedge between two people who were already having quite a number of arguments. So it seemed to me that the future looked very bleak with Alan Klein at the helm.
Mm,
And at some
yeah,
point, Paul McCartney was like, you know what? I'm never going to speak to Allen Klein ever again.
right.
And he did not
No, no,
from 1969 all the way.
right.
So, or 70 probably. Of course, the big nasty moment, the Let It Be film's going to come out. All right. So we're going to release the soundtrack and they want the release
Oh,
date. So they are like, okay, can we get Paul to change his release date? And
oh,
poor Ringo.
poor Ringo really got it. Got the finger in the face.
Yeah, goes to tell Paul this, and Paul probably Paul's worst moment of Paul's
Yeah, pretty
entire,
bad.
like, did we do one with? I know we put "Don't Let Me Clown,"
Yeah.
where we were like the John's mistakes, and did we do one on Paul? I don't
I
know
don't
if we
think
did one.
we should. We
We
should.
should, but this would be near the
Oh
top of the
yeah.
list of just like really like, come on, man, that's Ringo.
So yeah, it basically tells Ringo, I'm not signing anything. I don't want anything to do with Klein. Forget it. The three of you are on your own. I'm going to have the Eastmans represent me. The three of
Yeah,
you can do it. Well, that's fine, except there's a problem. And that's that the Beatles are a group of four and they have a partnership. And so this leads to the really, really ugly end of the year when Paul ends up suing the other three Beatles
yeah,
who stick with Klein, and things get very ugly at that point.
yeah. By the way, during this time, Klein's breaking up with the Stones.
Yeah,
He's been
meanwhile he's still managing the
he's
Stone,
he's still managing but not
sort
managing the
of. Yeah.
Stones. But the Stones are sick of him. Here's a thing from Wikipedia on this whole Stone situation. Although Klein greatly increased his client's incomes, he also enriched himself, sometimes without his client's knowledge. The Stones' $1.25 million advance from Decca label in 1965, for example, was deposited into a company that Klein had established, and the fine print of the contract did not require Klein to release it for 20 years.
Ooh.
Klein's involvement with both the Beatles and Stones would lead to years of litigation, and specifically for the Stones, accusations from the group that Klein had withheld royalty payments, stolen the publishing rights to their
Oh
songs,
no.
and neglected to pay their taxes for 5 years, which is what created the exile of
Mm.
Exile on Main Street in 1971. So the Stones in July 1970 break up with him. They're like,
Yep.
we're done with him. Forget this.
Yes.
And then that led to the Exile on Main Street recordings.
In France, getting away
Yeah.
from yeah.
But then, some of those songs are actually Abco.
Yeah.
So it's after Exile on Main Street, the Stones are free from him. So this is why you see these box sets come out and it's the early works of the Stones and it ends on Beggar's Banquet or whatever,
Hmm.
because it's all of the Abco albums coming out over and over again on vinyl. And then there's another separate package with the rest of the Stone stuff. So yeah.
Right.
So anyway, Beatles are breaking up, and it leads to Paul has to sue. Got Eastman's help, but it wasn't Eastman really. They go to
Oh yeah.
and they wisely find an in the know, somebody who really knows what they're doing in England, lawyer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sort of like a Klein-esque figure, somebody who's really known as being tough and
yeah,
yeah, no
yeah,
nonsense.
but who really, really knew the English courts and really knew the judge.
Yes,
And
yes.
so he brings up this whole thing right before lunch with the judge
I love
about
that.
how Klein like had been a tax dodge or
Mm,
some minor tax issues he'd had that were still open,
yes.
that really weren't anything,
Yeah.
and that were only created because Klein was a dickhead to uh, uh, the IRS people who came in thought it was beneath him.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to those IRS people, and canceled the meeting and was a jerk. So they kept after it on this like little thing that probably had he just been nice to the people, once again
Yeah. What
shooting
a
himself in the foot. They're suing for this partnership. This partnership was an agreed to thing, and really the courts should have ruled, no, this is a partnership. You guys have to keep doing this.
hmm
You signed
hmm
to that. But they were so savvy, and they also knew that Klein, if his defense was just, that's the agreement,
Yeah. No, he
then nothing came out. But he ended up sending all kinds of stuff to try to defend himself,
yeah.
even though he's barely the guy it's the other Beatles. It's Paul and the other Beatles. Do they want to sever this relationship? It's not about Klein, but he made it about himself.
Yeah,
Therefore,
sabotage him.
yeah, therefore opening it up to this view by Justice Stamp, I believe. There's something shady going on here with Klein. So he ends up miraculously giving Paul his freedom
Yeah.
and breaking the Beatles up officially at that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and putting the money into a receivership and yeah, not the outcome that they want, that the others, that any of them should have wanted, but a lot of it was Klein's self-sabotage. And
Mhm.
yeah, so now the Beatles are solo and Paul's on his own, completely a free agent. But the others continue their relationship with Klein for a while.
Yeah.
So Klein is very involved with John, still with Plastic Ono Band, big believer, big supporter.
Hmm.
The Imagine album,
Yep.
and
Things going well.
things
Things
going
going
well
well.
with John and Yoko. And then for
George's
George,
album.
yeah, All Things Must Pass. Obviously, huge hit, big supporter of My Sweet Lord, and
Yeah, very,
yeah,
very much pushed. Like, um, you've got a lot of great singles on
yeah,
this. Like,
yeah,
release
yeah,
them,
yeah.
release My Sweet Lord.
Right.
Which there's like it's a little side antidote, by the way, that apparently John was somewhere
Oh
with
yeah.
Klein, I guess, overseas or something, and My Sweet Lord's playing. He's like, "Ah, I can't get away from this fucking song."
I know. It's great.
Then comes Bangladesh, concert
Yes.
for Bangladesh. And there was a
Oh, this
story
was
in
good.
there about Bob Dylan's gonna maybe come, maybe not. And he is trying to get Bob Dylan to play a specific song.
Positively Fourth Street about Albert Grossman, so Dylan's famous manager who you see in Don't Look Back and you see in a lot of the early videos with Dylan, because he was kind of a interesting managerial figure, but they had kind of a bad split too. So he wanted Dylan to sing that song.
Imagine trying to tell
Be-
Bob Dylan what song to play.
Right, exactly, exactly. Because of course Klein's always looking for that next person he could manage because he doesn't have the Stones anymore. The Beatles are broken up. So maybe I can manage Bob Dylan because he hates Albert Grossman. So he's always got his eye out looking
Yeah.
for that next thing. So yeah, there's a lot of detail about Bangladesh concert, which I found really interesting. Just about the messiness of the charity. They want to give the money to UNICEF and just figuring out how to deal with all the copyrights. And then Dylan was actually the problem, wasn't he? Because he was on Columbia Records and they
Yeah,
didn't want
yeah.
to, they wanted payment for him. And
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mess, but on the Bangladesh video, you can see Klein at a press conference with George and Ravi Shankar. He's
Yeah.
sitting there, so he's very much a part of the scene. Yeah, it was interesting that Ravi Shankar insisted that he be paid for the Bangladesh concert when nobody else did. So that was interesting. I don't know what that says about Ravi Shankar, but any case, huge
Yeah.
success, big, great concert.
So he was around in 1972, still with John and Yoko, but that relations are
Oh yeah.
tensing there. He was involved in the one-to-one
Yes.
benefit concerts. So he's doing these benefit concerts. I think later it was shown that he would do things like create these, I forget what they called them, like
Clean label. Yeah.
clean label promotional records and basically selling them out of his truck to sort of skim the money,
Yeah. Yeah.
like it was something that not just he had done, but other people had done.
Yeah.
This whole time he's still like they haven't come to a settlement with McCartney yet. At some point, the rest of the Beatles are like, that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
We're sick of this guy. Let's get rid of him. They dump him. Does that sit well with him? No,
Of course not.
of course not. So what happens is George has this lawsuit.
I love this. This is one of my favorite stories that I got from the book about My Sweet Lord.
There's a lawsuit
Yeah.
from the what's the group?
From He's So Fine, from the Chiffons, and then the
Hmm.
company was Bright Tunes that
Hmm.
published it. And so accusing plagiarism of that, which we all know is pretty accurate, at least, or very close, let's say.
Hmm.
And so what happens here with Klein?
He ends up buying the company that owns She's So Fine. So even though he was technically was the
The
My Sweet
defendant, right?
Lord, the
Yeah.
defendant, he's also now the person who's going to be enriching if it goes towards She's So Fine. So he's
Yeah.
played both sides
Amazing.
brilliantly, kind
Amazing.
of, but also just terribly.
Yeah.
It's like, he wants to now win the lawsuit so he can get some money back.
It was going to be what, 2.3 million
Yeah.
dollars, and then the judge dropped it to 1 point something million, and then eventually it was 577,000 from
Yeah.
George to settle. But wow, what a sneaky,
Yeah, that's
pretty
next level
low.
sneakiness there.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
of course, around this time, he's burned all his bridges with the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
Paul's looking pretty good right
Paul's
now.
looking good.
John Lennon writes a song.
Ah, yes.
And of course, we talked about this song before, Steel and Glass.
Before in 1970, we had Beware of Abco. That was in one of those uh, in Beware of Darkness that George sang, but better was the Steel and Glass from
Yeah.
with your, even though I don't think he had an LA tan, but he did have a New York walk and a New York talk. So maybe he
Yeah.
did have a tan. I don't know. But yeah, John supposedly writing about Allen Klein.
Something we forgot to mention is during the Imagine sessions, How Do You Sleep
Oh
is
yeah.
going up. And How Do You Sleep, of course, is a nasty song about Paul. And I guess Alan Klein mentioned, like, you're just another day. Like, that should be the
Yeah.
line, or it suggested a line or two that was taken. So when John goes to write Steel and Glass is basically the same tune as How Do You
Yeah.
Sleep? So
Yeah.
it's sort of a comment on, oh, this was your one contribution. So it's doubly nasty. Not that
Yeah.
great of a song, to be
No, no.
honest.
How Do You Sleep's a better
But
song than
yeah.
Steel and Glass.
So, but it's
But
got
yeah,
more. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
it does. It's got the horns on it.
Yeah,
So Klein's basically, that's the end of his Beatles
yeah.
affiliation, but
But
he's not done yet.
he starts to get in a little bit of trouble. Those
Oh
cleans we
yeah.
mentioned
Yeah, he was
that with the concert for Bangladesh, think about this. This is a charity event,
Yeah.
a charity company, and he's creating these like records to be sold black market style.
Avoiding the company
Of
and the marketing and the
Yeah,
whole, yeah,
just to make a quick buck. It's
yeah,
really like not nice.
tax evasion. Yeah.
He goes on, he's got some involvement with Pete Townsend. It was very
Yeah.
minor. I don't
Yeah. He
really recall
helped
too much of that.
helped Pete Townsend a bit. And this was after he was served 2 months in jail.
Oh yeah, this was right in 1980. He had a rough
Yeah, he had a
1980.
rough 1980. Later on, he got involved with Pete Townsend. He was hanging out with Phil Spector also.
I think
And
he became Phil Spector's official manager,
right, right. That's
which
an
is
interesting
like hey,
combination.
hey,
Yeah.
hey, I hired Phil Spector. It's like, oh, Phil Spector. Okay, he comes in with his big
Yeah, the
hair and
hair.
guns. So
But yeah, he was put in
yeah,
jail, and the book talks about how Klein thought it was kind of amusing being in jail because everyone knew he's like, oh, I want to be in the maximum security prison because I don't want to leave New York, and he's got murders around, but he's safe. But people
yeah.
want to talk to him about who he knows, and
Apparently, he's just always on the
on the
phone
phone with his
with
lawyer and his wife and his
yeah, and the
mistress.
company that he runs is like, oh, we're gonna get a couple
Oh yeah,
months peace, and but no, he was just
no,
always calling them, so they're like, oh Jesus.
yeah,
And then John dies. Terrible. He feels terrible.
yeah,
I mean, he liked John.
yeah.
He liked the Beatles, wanted to be their manager. I don't think he was like a hateful, spiteful, oh, I
No,
hate
no.
all these people, except when it comes to making a quick buck. Apparently, he goes to talk to Yoko. He's wearing a
Oh, it's just
tuxedo or something because he's supposed to be going to some
a wedding, right? Or
wedding or
some, yeah.
something, and he stops to talk to her. And she's like, he had so much, John had so much to live for. It should have been you.
Ugh.
So that's a
Oh,
real
oh, oh.
nasty comment, but
Yeah. I'm
I
sure
mean,
she,
her husband just died too.
of
So
course,
it's,
she was raw right at that
yeah,
point. So eventually, to wrap it up on, he didn't do much else particularly after that, apart from we'll give the story of the Bittersweet Symphony.
yeah,
But by the end of he died eventually, got Alzheimer's, and
yeah,
and died. And then Yoko and Sean did go to his funeral, so it
yeah.
did kind of make up for that. But yeah, you want to give that story
Well,
of,
that they used the last time sample. He hops on it. Bittersweet Symphony, of course, was a huge hit, and not just a huge hit like on the radio, but it's played a lot at sporting
like,
events.
yeah,
And
soccer games and stuff.
so basically by doing this, this was 1997 that single came out. Abco was Abco's big money maker for years and
Yeah.
years and years and years and years after that because
Yep.
it was just played all the time everywhere on and he was like, "Oh yeah, let's use anything I own in commercials. Let's do it."
He didn't
So,
care.
yeah, he
Yeah.
wasn't like the Doors or anything like that
No.
where you're, oh, that's not good. He just like
Yeah. Make money off it.
cash
Great.
in
Yeah.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. The real assessment of it is a guy who wants to make money.
Yeah.
Does he want to help artists? Maybe somewhat,
Sometimes.
but he
Yeah.
mostly wants to help himself make money and to not be poor and to not go back to the orphanage. I think
Right.
if you like really psychologically
Yeah.
look at it. So I got the sense from the book that, he still had people who were like, you know what, he was generally a good guy.
Yeah.
And I do think that like the English press hated him
Yeah.
because they are English and they are very much like, this is not our type of guy. But is some of that because he's Jewish, because
Yes.
he's from New York, because he talks like,
A
very
New Yorker.
brash, a New
Yeah.
Yorker?
Yeah.
I think so. I think there is some extra anti-Semitism
Yeah.
coming into play when it comes to Allen Klein.
I think so too. You get a pretty nuanced view, I think, more of him than we're led to believe, which is good. And that's something that everyone should have. I think Yoko's another good case of that, of somebody who
Yeah.
immediately people hated and thought she was the reason that the Beatles broke up, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
then as people tell her story more and she tells her story, and you see a much more balanced picture that there was more involved. So I think Klein is the same way. And there's a lot of what ifs. What if he, like we said, what if Brian Epstein hadn't died? What if they had a different plan for a manager? What if Paul hadn't been kind of sneaky? Or what if some
Yeah.
things had happened differently? Who
And
knows?
what if he would have reached over the aisle and been like, "Oh,
Yeah,
Eastman,
yeah,
come
Eastman, I'll
come
work with you.
be my buddy and
Right,
we'll
right.
because it was important to keep the Beatles together. That's why he said to John, don't say that you're quitting the
Yeah,
Beatles. He burnt so much bridge with Paul.
yeah,
Paul obviously didn't want him from the start, wasn't interested in him, never wanted to talk to him again.
yeah,
So at some point that was like unsalvageable.
yeah.
It's
It's
not as cut
complicated.
and dry as 20-year-old me writing a paper thought it
No, or me thinking, reading something in a book by somebody who worked at Apple and then said Klein was the worst person ever. Well, yeah, you were fired.
was.
You,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
gravy train was over, sure.
yeah, yeah,
But I think it's an interesting story. And
yeah.
the Peter Doggett book, You Never Give Me Your Money, is another recommended source that talks a lot
Hmm.
about this period and Klein. And
Yeah.
he's also very nuanced about Klein's involvement here too. So here's is a final question. Do you think the Beatles were worse off or better off having Klein in their employment?
Oh boy, that's a hard one to
Uh,
answer.
I know.
I
That's kind of
mean,
the big
it
question.
probably worse off
Yeah.
in the aggregate. I mean, Apple was going to be changed one way or another, but maybe it could have been a little more elegantly done. There was definitely a split that came from bringing in Allen Klein. We got to do it, was John's very
Yeah.
strong belief, and then cut to 6 years later, he's writing or 5 years, 4 years later, he's
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
Steel and Glass. It's
Yeah, John's one of those
sort of
people that just falls in love quickly
yeah.
and then gets burned.
Overall, probably I think maybe it would have been better had they found somebody else. They found a different solution.
Yeah.
Maybe not Eastman, or maybe Eastman would have been better. Eastman did go on to manage acts for years,
Yeah.
and
Well-known ones.
maybe we'll do an Eastman,
Yeah,
put them in
friend.
the put them in the Fringe show or whatever.
Yeah. We talk about Linda. Yeah.
So
So, what do you think about Alan Klein? Let us know. We'll read your comments
yeah,
and
it's just wanted to mention quickly. Usually we do a news
oh
segment
yeah.
here, but there was so much news
Yes.
that so we're going to point you to our other April news updates segment, a separate video or podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So stay
So
tuned for that if you haven't heard that already.
yeah.
But yeah, in the meantime, going back and thinking about all of this stuff with was Alan Klein a friend, a Beatle friend, or a villain, or somewhere in between? I think probably somewhere in between is where it sounds like we're both
Yeah.
ending up here. But
And of course, you can find our podcast on Podbean. Find all of our episodes there, and we're
yes,
getting more of our older episodes up on YouTube. As I just uploaded 3 older episodes, including our Band on the Run review and
with
uh,
underdubbed.
underdubbed in our April 2024 releases with Donnie Harrison and
Oh, great.
John Olin and some of those. So check those episodes out if you haven't heard them on YouTube, and give us a follow and a like, and that helps our YouTube channel as well.
Well, thanks as always for listening, and we'll be back at you soon with a new episode.